She announced, "I cheated because you deserved it," while sitting at my dinner table. I just nodded, packed her suitcase, and waited for the look on her face when she noticed what was missing. I never thought a dinner table could become the stage for the complete collapse of a relationship, but that night, mine did. It was a Sunday evening, just the two of us and her cousin, Ivy, who'd been visiting for the weekend. The house smelled like roasted chicken and rosemary, candles flickering on the table. Everything looked calm, but underneath it all, something had been off for weeks. Renee had become distant. She'd always been ambitious, juggling events, clients, and late-night calls. But lately, her work trips were too frequent, her explanations too rehearsed. I wasn't naive. I noticed the small shifts. Her phone turning face down, her laughter fading when I walked in, the new perfume that didn't smell like anything I'd ever given her. I didn't press her. I figured whatever was going on would show itself. And it did, at the most ordinary moment imaginable. We were halfway through dinner when Ivy started talking about relationships. Something about how modern couples were becoming more transparent with their needs. Renee laughed, a sharp, nervous sound, and then looked straight at me. She said, almost casually, that she had something to get off her chest. Her tone wasn't apologetic. It was self-righteous. She said she'd been seeing someone else. Then she added, as if she was the one betrayed, that she did it because I made her feel small. Because I cared more about work than her feelings. Because I didn't make her feel alive. I didn't shout. I didn't even put my fork down. Ivy froze, mouth open mid-bite. Renee kept going, almost performing. She talked about how she deserved to be understood, how I was emotionally unavailable. Then she said the words that burned into me. "You deserved it, Noah. You made me this way." I don't know why, but I felt no anger in that moment. Just silence. A cold, clinical silence that made her flinch more than if I'd yelled. I remember standing up, taking her empty plate, and walking to the sink. I started washing the dishes while she ranted behind me, her words tumbling over themselves, desperate to fill the void my silence created. When she finally stormed off, muttering about needing air, Ivy sat there, pale and trembling. She whispered, asking if I was okay. I nodded. I think she expected me to cry or throw something. But my mind had already switched to something else entirely, logistics. When the door slammed behind Renee, I went to my office. I logged into our joint account. The transactions stared back at me like a confession written in numbers. Hotel bookings in Denver, where she supposedly had a client convention. Transfers to a small vendor called K&L Supplies. The name hit me, Kyle. He was the guy she'd mentioned from her department, the one she always said was just easy to talk to. I opened the shared iCloud drive on the computer she'd left unlocked. There, tucked inside a folder titled Event Photos 2024, were selfies, the two of them in a hotel mirror. One picture was dated during the week she told me she was stuck in Chicago due to a flight delay. I didn't feel rage. I felt something colder. A strange, detached satisfaction. Because now I knew exactly what I was dealing with. I printed everything, screenshots, receipts, call logs. I stored them in a brown envelope. Then I opened another window and began transferring funds from our shared savings, the account I had built for our future home, back to my personal one. Legally, I had every right. 90% of that balance was mine. She had contributed nothing for months. When I finished, I went to the bedroom. Her suitcase was under the bed, bright red, barely used. I packed it neatly. All the things she'd bought for herself, gone. I left her clothes, her personal items, but took back everything I'd paid for. The MacBook, the jewelry, the designer bag she flaunted at work. By midnight, the place was spotless. The only thing left was her toothbrush. I threw it away. Then, before heading to bed, I made one final move. I opened Facebook and found Kyle's wife, Amber, a woman I'd met once at a corporate mixer. Her profile photo showed her with 2 kids. I hesitated, then sent her a short message. "You might want to check the photos in the folder titled Venice Pitch on your husband's work drive." I hit send and shut my laptop. By morning, the chain reaction had already begun. Renee came home around 9 a.m., reeking of cheap wine and perfume that wasn't hers. She dropped her purse and froze when she saw her packed suitcase by the door. Her eyes darted around. Confusion first, then realization. I was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, calm as ever. She asked what the hell I was doing. I just pointed to the suitcase and told her she should go before work. She started shouting that I was being dramatic. I stayed quiet. Then she noticed what was missing. Her laptop, gone. Her gold bracelet, gone. Her handbag collection, gone. That's when her voice broke. She ran to the bedroom and flung open the closet. The top shelf where she kept the boxes of expensive shoes was empty. Then she pulled open the dresser drawer, the one where she'd stashed a few $1,000s in cash from her event bonuses. Empty. On the fridge, taped neatly, was a note in my handwriting. Everything you bought with my money stays. Everything I bought for you goes. She read it 3 times. Her hands were shaking. Then her phone started ringing, the first of many that day. It was her office's HR department. The message I'd sent anonymously with screenshots of her travel expenses and the personal charges on the company card had landed. The trip she called a conference had already been flagged for audit. She was being placed on leave pending investigation. I didn't say a word. I sipped my coffee and watched as she began to crumble in real time. Renee tried to defend herself, saying I had no right, that I was vindictive. I reminded her, calmly, that she'd said I deserved it, that she'd chosen this. She grabbed her suitcase, tears streaking her face, and hissed that she'd ruined me for this. I told her she already had. She just hadn't realized she'd ruined herself too. When the door finally closed, the silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was electric. I picked up my phone and texted Ivy, thanking her for dinner and apologizing that she had to witness it. She replied that she'd already left for the airport early that morning. She didn't sound surprised. I realized then that Renee's own family had probably known the truth for a while. By noon, I had changed every password, frozen our joint card, and contacted a locksmith to rekey the apartment. But what I didn't expect was the message that came late that night. It wasn't from Renee. It was from Amber, Kyle's wife. She sent just one sentence. "Thank you for confirming what I already suspected." That's when I knew the real fallout was only beginning. The morning after Renee stormed out, the apartment felt like an entirely different place. It was silent, organized, clean. Everything that once reminded me of her chaos. Her scarves thrown over chairs, her hair products lined across the sink, her perfume lingering on the hallway walls, was gone. I brewed coffee, sat by the window, and waited for the next domino to fall. It didn't take long. By 10, my phone vibrated with a text from Mason, my oldest friend and coworker. He wrote, "She's at the lobby." He meant my office building. I hadn't told him much, but he knew enough. He said she'd shown up, demanding to see me, crying and shouting. He told her I was on site in another state. That was the truth, or at least close enough. I'd requested personal leave and was already moving my things into my late uncle's cabin by the lake, a place few people even knew existed. From the window, I could imagine her reaction when she realized she'd been cut off completely. By noon, she'd tried calling me 6 times, then 10, then 15. By 3 o'clock, I'd received an email from her office's HR manager, a polite but pointed request for confirmation of certain expense reports I had supposedly approved as personal travel. I didn't reply. They would find everything they needed soon enough. But I wasn't the only one pulling strings. That evening, while I was boxing the last of her things to drop off at storage, my phone lit up with a new message. It was from Amber, the wife of her coworker, Kyle. She wrote, "You should know he's denying everything. But I have screenshots. Thank you for tipping me off. I'll handle it from here." Attached were pictures of Kyle's messages to Renee, ones I'd never seen. He'd been the one planning the trips, wiring money to her under event fees, bragging about how his wife was too busy to notice. But Amber had noticed, and now, she wanted retribution as much as I did. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. By the next morning, I learned just how fast the truth travels in corporate circles. Renee's company froze her email access. Her coworkers began whispering, forwarding screenshots, dissecting the timeline of her business trip. The affair wasn't a secret anymore. It was an internal scandal. At 8 a.m., she called again. I finally picked up, not out of sympathy, but out of curiosity. Her voice was raw, breaking between sobs and fury. She demanded to know why I'd humiliated her. I told her she had done that on her own. She called me cruel. I reminded her that cruelty requires intent. I had simply returned what she gave. Then she screamed something that almost made me laugh. She said, "You're trying to erase me." She wasn't wrong. That was exactly what I was doing. Over the next 2 days, she began unraveling. Her cousin Ivy called me once, quietly apologizing for what she'd seen and saying Renee had lost it. She'd been crashing on Ivy's couch, alternating between tears and rage, talking about how I'd taken everything. Ivy asked if I could at least talk to her, to calm her down. I said no. I was done being her anchor. Meanwhile, Kyle's wife wasn't staying quiet. Amber had started sharing screenshots through private group chats. By the end of the week, half of Renee's industry contacts had seen the messages. The whispers turned into something worse. People started unfollowing her, leaving her out of work invitations, removing her from project group chats. In her line of work, events and PR, reputation was oxygen, and hers was gone. On Thursday, she showed up at my apartment again. I watched her through the peephole before deciding whether to open the door. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hair tied back messily. She was holding a crumpled envelope. When I opened the door, she shoved it toward me and said, "I'm returning the bracelet." The same one I'd already taken. Inside the envelope was a note that read, "You win." But she didn't understand. This wasn't about winning. It was about truth. She begged to talk. I let her in, but only because I wanted her to see what she'd lost. The apartment was stripped of her influence. Bare walls, simple furniture, no trace of the past. She looked around, dazed, realizing that the life she built here had vanished. When she saw the empty space where her vanity used to stand, she asked, "Where's all my stuff?" I told her everything was gone, sold, returned, or donated. She stared at me as if I'd spoken another language. Then she noticed something missing that hit deeper. The painting above the couch, a framed photo of the two of us on the pier, was gone. That was her favorite. She'd said it made the place feel like home. That photo was now ash. She sank onto the couch, speechless. I told her I wasn't interested in revenge. I just wanted peace. Then I added, "You told me I deserved it. I'm just agreeing with you." She left without another word. The next few days were quiet. I focused on my work, on rebuilding my own schedule. But beneath that calm, things kept spiraling for her. I heard from Mason again. He'd been out for drinks with mutual friends when someone mentioned that Renee's HR department had officially terminated her contract. Apparently, the investigation revealed financial misconduct. She tried to appeal, blaming Kyle for the misuse of funds, but Kyle had already resigned and vanished, leaving her to take the fall. By Friday, her professional world had collapsed. But that wasn't the end of it. Amber, now fully aware of everything, filed for divorce. She even mentioned Renee's name in the paperwork, citing irreparable damage caused by third-party involvement. In a small city where gossip moved faster than traffic, that line alone was enough to destroy Renee's reputation entirely. Her social media disappeared. She went silent. 2 weeks later, I received a handwritten letter at my office addressed in her familiar cursive. I almost threw it away, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside, she wrote that she'd lost everything. Her job, her apartment, her reputation. She said she hoped I was happy now. But then there was a line that stuck with me. "You took my life apart like it was a puzzle you'd built just to dismantle." I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. I didn't feel triumph, just finality. That weekend, I went to the lake cabin again. The quiet there was unnerving at first, but then it started to feel right. In the evenings, I sat by the dock, listening to the wind move through the trees, thinking about how quickly everything had changed. A month ago, I was planning to propose. Now, I was watching the reflection of the moon on the water, feeling something that almost resembled peace. I hadn't planned to destroy her life. I'd just let her choices complete their natural course. Still, part of me wondered what she was doing, where she'd go next. But I didn't reach out. I'd done enough. What I didn't know was that her next move would bring the chaos straight to my doorstep again. Because Renee was not the kind of person who could accept silence as closure. 2 weeks passed in silence. No messages, no calls, no emails. Just quiet. I almost started to believe it was over. I was wrong. On a cold Thursday morning, I was at the cabin, preparing to drive back into town for a supplier meeting, when I saw a car pull up on the dirt road. My stomach tightened even before I recognized it. It was Renee's black sedan. She stepped out wearing sunglasses, holding a paper bag, her hair unwashed, her expression uneven, half rage, half desperation. I didn't move. I watched as she walked toward the porch, her boots crunching over the gravel. When she reached the steps, she stopped. "I just need to talk," she said. Her voice was hoarse, smaller than I'd ever heard it. I let her speak. She said she'd lost everything. Her job, her apartment, her savings. She said no one would talk to her, that her friends had turned on her. Then she tried to paint herself as a victim, insisting Kyle had manipulated her, that it wasn't supposed to mean anything. I listened, expressionless. When she finally ran out of excuses, I handed her a manila folder I had prepared days earlier. Inside were copies of her expense reports, HR emails, and Kyle's resignation letter. She flipped through the pages in silence until she reached the note I'd attached on top. "You built this." I just let it stand. She stood frozen, the papers trembling in her hands. I didn't yell or gloat. I simply told her she should leave before the neighbors saw her car. She didn't move. Instead, she whispered that she still loved me. The words meant nothing now. I walked inside and closed the door. Through the window, I saw her stand in the driveway for almost 10 minutes before finally driving off. I thought that would be the last time I saw her. I was wrong again. The following week, strange things began happening. I got a call from HR at my own company asking if I'd recently shared confidential client information. They said someone had sent an anonymous tip claiming I'd stolen project data. I laughed, until they mentioned the sender's name. R. Carver. She had tried to retaliate. But the email was sloppy. It included old attachments from her personal Gmail, including one that still had her signature block visible. My boss knew immediately it was fabricated. He told me to let it go, but I could tell he was furious that she'd even tried. That's when I decided not to just defend myself, but to turn the tables completely. Using the same data I'd gathered before, her expense violations, her company policy breaches, and screenshots showing her coordination with Kyle during office hours, I drafted a timeline and sent it, anonymously, to one of the biggest event planning blogs in our city. Not as revenge, but as a case study in corporate misconduct and relationship boundaries. I made sure no personal identifiers were published, but anyone who knew her field would recognize the story instantly. Within days, the blog went viral among local professionals. The story of the ambitious planner who sabotaged her own career for an affair spread fast. Her name wasn't written, but it didn't have to be. The clues were enough. By the end of that week, she'd become a pariah in every networking circle she used to dominate. Then came the twist I didn't see coming. Kyle's wife, Amber, reached out again. She asked to meet. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a small cafe downtown. She was composed, calm, but her eyes were cold. She said she was filing for divorce and suing Kyle for half of everything. She wanted to thank me for helping her see the truth. But then she dropped something unexpected. She told me Renee had contacted her, begging to clarify things. Renee had claimed that I was the one who had set her up, that I'd planted evidence to make her look guilty. Amber smirked when she told me that. She said Renee was delusional, that she'd seen enough proof of the affair herself. Still, hearing that Renee was now spinning lies about me made my blood boil. But the worst was yet to come. A few days later, Mason invited me to a small party his firm was hosting. When I arrived, I realized half the guests were people Renee used to know. I hadn't expected her to be there, but she was. She looked different, thin, worn down, a forced smile plastered on her face. When she saw me, the room fell silent. Everyone had heard some version of what had happened, and most people stepped back, pretending to focus on their drinks. She approached me anyway. "You think you won?" she hissed under her breath, still smiling like nothing was wrong. I told her this wasn't the place. But she kept going, whispering that she'd tell everyone I'd been abusive, that I'd controlled her finances, that I'd blackmailed her with fake evidence. Her words didn't shock me, they disgusted me. So, I said one sentence back. "Be careful, Renee. People here know the truth, and some of them still have your emails saved." She froze. I walked away. 5 minutes later, she left the party. 2 days after that, I got a call from Mason. He sounded hesitant. He said Renee had been calling him nonstop, asking about my whereabouts, asking if I was seeing someone. She'd even shown up at his office pretending to drop off an apology letter for me. When he told her I didn't work there anymore, since I had moved divisions, she demanded to know where I was stationed. He refused to tell her. She started crying in the lobby until security escorted her out. That was when I realized something deeper. She wasn't trying to fix things. She was trying to control the narrative again. She couldn't stand being powerless. So I decided to give her what she hated most, irrelevance. I blocked her number completely, deleted her old messages, and changed my phone. I even stopped checking social media. But through mutual friends, I still heard the updates. She had tried applying for jobs in smaller firms, but every time her background came up, someone recognized her name from the blog post or from industry gossip. HR departments quietly passed. One firm even rescinded an offer after checking her references. One night, I received a short email from her personal account. The subject line read, "Do you feel better now?" The body said, "You've taken everything from me. You ruined my life." I didn't reply. I just archived it. But inside, something shifted. I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. Weeks later, something unexpected happened again, but this time, it wasn't Renee. Amber reached out one last time. She invited me to her firm's charity event. I hesitated but agreed. It wasn't about her. It was about closing the last loop. When I arrived, I saw familiar faces from both my company and hers. And there, near the back table, was Renee. She looked small, cornered, dressed too elegantly for a place she clearly didn't belong anymore. She wasn't a guest, she was serving drinks. Our eyes met for a second. She looked away immediately. Amber leaned over and whispered, "I didn't invite her. She took a temp job through a catering agency." I said nothing. But in that moment, I understood something that made all of this feel strangely final. It wasn't about revenge anymore. Life had already balanced itself. As I left the event, I glanced back once. Renee stood near the door, holding an empty tray, pretending not to see me. But the look in her eyes said everything. She didn't hate me anymore. She just understood. Everything she'd built had been borrowed, and she'd spent it all. After that charity event, I didn't see Renee again for a long while. Life settled into something calm and methodical. My company offered me a promotion, senior project manager on a new development contract that, ironically, replaced the same downtown venue where Renee's firm used to host events. The world, it seemed, had a sense of balance. But the peace didn't last forever. One evening, Mason dropped by my apartment unannounced, carrying takeout and 2 beers. He looked uneasy, like he'd been sitting on something for days. After a long pause, he said, "She's back in town." I didn't need him to say who. Renee had resurfaced. According to Mason, she'd been hired part-time at a marketing agency under a new surname, Renee Collins. She was working freelance contracts, pretending to have stepped away from corporate for personal growth. It would have been almost funny if not for what came next. She had reached out to a few of our mutual acquaintances, telling them I'd moved on easily because I was seeing someone all along. She was trying to repaint herself as the victim again, testing how much sympathy she could still pull. And, unbelievably, she told one of Mason's colleagues that she forgave me for ruining her career. Forgave me. I laughed when he told me that, but deep down, I knew it wasn't harmless. Renee didn't know how to let things die quietly. She'd always needed an audience. A few days later, I got a letter forwarded to my office. It wasn't handwritten like before. It was typed, clean, printed on thick paper. It started polite. "Noah, I've had time to reflect. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope you can acknowledge that what happened between us was mutual failure." Then came the real motive. "I also hope you'll consider retracting anything you might have said that affected my professional life. It's been hard rebuilding from nothing." She ended with a line that was pure Renee. "You once said I lit the match, but you built the house that burned." I folded the letter, placed it back in its envelope, and slipped it into the trash. I knew what this was, a test, a soft probe to see if I'd engage. I didn't, but I wasn't naive. I knew how people like her worked. Once ignored, they start looking for another opening. That opening came a month later. Our company had been coordinating with a new PR contractor for our expansion campaign. I got the memo one morning, scanning through the list of assigned external consultants, and froze. There it was, at the bottom of the sheet, Renee Collins, Public Relations Assistant. It was almost surreal. She had circled back into my orbit, unintentionally or not. When we met at the first project coordination call, she acted as though nothing had ever happened. She smiled, professional, poised. Not a hint of shame or acknowledgement. For the first few minutes, she managed it. But halfway through the meeting, she glanced at me, and I saw it. That flicker of panic. She realized I held her entire past in my hands. I said nothing. I was polite, neutral. But later that afternoon, I called the project head. I told him we might have an issue with confidentiality and reputation risk. I sent the file. Within 48 hours, her contract was restructured, and she was gone again. I didn't do it for vengeance. I did it because people like her feed on access. The best punishment was simply closing the door again. A few weeks later, I got an email from Mason with a screenshot. It was a post from a local online forum. The thread was titled, "Anyone know what happened to Renee Carver?" Someone had written that she was last seen working temp gigs at events, living in a small rental near the city edge. Someone else commented that she'd burned too many bridges. It wasn't malicious gossip anymore. It was pity. That same week, I learned she'd tried to apply for an apartment downtown, but had been rejected because of a poor credit record and an unresolved HR settlement from her old job. Everything she'd built, everything she'd used to define herself, was collapsing in real time. I should have felt satisfied, but I didn't. There's no satisfaction in watching someone destroy themselves, just clarity. A month later, I started dating again. Her name was Leah Benton, an engineer who worked with our firm on the new housing project. She was kind but sharp, the kind of woman who noticed details and didn't romanticize brokenness. One evening, over dinner, Leah mentioned something strange. She said she'd gotten an email from an anonymous sender claiming I was emotionally unstable. It was laughably amateurish. The tone gave it away instantly. Renee was still trying to play the shadow puppeteer, hoping to disrupt anything that looked like peace in my life. Leah looked at me across the table and said, "You don't have to explain." That was the moment I realized I'd already won, not through revenge, but by living in a way she couldn't touch. But Renee's final act came later that year, and it was the one that ended everything permanently. It started with a call from Amber, Kyle's ex-wife. She'd stayed in touch occasionally since her divorce finalized. She told me she'd seen Renee at a networking bar, talking to a journalist from the same local blog that had published the corporate misconduct story months earlier. Renee was trying to spin a new version, claiming she'd been manipulated and that her vindictive ex had weaponized her mistakes. Amber laughed when she told me. "She still doesn't get it," she said. "She thinks people care about her side of the story." They didn't. The blog never ran the piece. But what did surface, a week later, was something entirely different. An anonymous Reddit post appeared under our /workplace confessions, detailing the saga of a corporate event planner who sabotaged her career over an affair. It mirrored her story almost exactly, except this time, it ended with her attempting to leak company data to a competitor and getting blacklisted. Whether true or not, it spread fast. Within days, every remnant of her professional credibility was gone. Recruiters blacklisted her. Agencies blocked her email. Her name became a warning whispered by HR departments. She called Mason once more, asking if I'd been behind it. He told her no, I wasn't. I didn't have to be. Her own behavior had created a pattern so recognizable that strangers could fill in the blanks for me. 6 months later, I drove back to the lake cabin. It was late autumn, the kind of cold that makes everything smell like smoke and pine. I stood by the dock, the same place where she'd once told me she wanted forever. In my pocket was a small box I'd received in the mail the previous week. No return address, just my name on the front. Inside was her apartment key, the same one I'd taken from her months before. Alongside it was a burned matchstick taped to a small note. It read, "You were right." I lit it. No signature. No drama. Just that. I threw the box into the lake and watched it disappear under the rippling water. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in years. Months passed. Life became normal again. Leah and I moved into a new place near the city's edge, not far from where I'd started. I was finally free from the weight of her name, her voice, her ghost. But one afternoon, I stopped by the animal shelter where Renee and I had once volunteered years ago. It felt like closing a circle. I donated a check large enough to help them rebuild a section of their facility. The manager thanked me and mentioned, almost absently, that a woman had recently called asking if they had volunteer openings again. Said her name was Renee, she added. I smiled faintly and told her to give Renee the afternoon shift. It suited her. Then I left. I never checked back to see if she showed up. I didn't need to. Some stories don't need final chapters. They just fade, quietly, into consequences.